Hello and welcome to this week's The Hindu Parley. It's a discussion that gets you a 360-degree view on the big issues of the moment. Today, in the aftermath of the Pahalgam attack, where terrorists gunned down 26 men, all but one of them tourists, India has laid out a number of measures so far. But with me to discuss what's next are two of the most foremost experts on the issue. Sharat Sabharwal, who was India's High Commissioner to Pakistan from 2009 to 2013. He's the author of India's Pakistan Conundrum, a book that looks at managing a complex relationship. Lieutenant General Hooda is the former Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army's Northern Command, and he oversaw the 2016 surgical cross LOC strike that took place after the Uri attack in September 2016. Thank you so much for speaking with us at The Hindu.
Pleasure, Suhasini.
I wanted to start by asking both of you really to take a look at what the government has announced so far. The Prime Minister has said that he has given the military, quote unquote, a free hand for operations. Pakistan's government, of course, has been saying every 24 hours that an attack is imminent. Given that every kind of indicator seems to suggest a possible military option is next going to be exercised, would you say that all non-military options have now been exhausted? I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Sabharwal.
Look, there seems to be no diplomacy between the two countries at the moment. But of course, we know that some other countries, notably the United States, and they have said so, they are in touch with both sides and urging them not to escalate. But I ask myself, what would it take for Pakistan to do and for our government to accept, which would be acceptable to our government, which would then move us towards de-escalation. There's nothing of that kind on the horizon. On the other hand, you have to take into account the strong public sentiment on the issue, which the government also has to take into account. Then we have the record of what was done in 2016 and 2019, surgical strikes and the Balakot strike. And now, of course, and there is an expectation that there will be some kinetic action. And now, of course, Prime Minister, we have seen has given a free hand to the armed forces to pick the mode, place, and time of action, etc. So it would seem to me that we are moving towards some kinetic action. I don't know what it may be. But of course, we have to wait and watch.
All right. In terms of other options that you may think about, General Hooda, in terms of even military but non-kinetic options, do you think all of those have been exhausted?
So, Suhasini, as Ambassador Sabharwal pointed out, I think non-military options are still on the table. For example, attempts to put international pressure, get some countries, to get Pakistan to back off. But again, the kind of statements that are coming from Pakistan are very, very sort of hostile, talking about Indian blood flowing in Indus rivers, etc. So I really don't see any give from the Pakistani side. And therefore, obviously, there is talk that if there are no options left, then some sort of use of military force it seems to be the only way sort of going forward. Suhasini, wouldn't read too much into, free hand has been given to the forces. Obviously, as far as pure military planning is concerned, what kind of preparations are required, at what time we should carry out actions, are obviously something that the military has always had a free hand. I mean, I recall in my own case, when we were planning the cross-border operation, the government didn't interfere at all in the planning or how many targets, etc., etc. So that is obvious, but that doesn't mean that the military can then start doing whatever it wants. Obviously, whatever is contemplated will get political approval. I mean, that's clearly obvious. So, as I said, I wouldn't read just too much into this free hand means now suddenly, things are just going to go out of control.
Ambassador Sabharwal, you spoke about the idea that Pakistan's responses and so did General Hooda. I just wanted to ask you, we have in the past seen Pakistani responses post 2008, for example. Pakistan offered to even send a team and opened up a huge investigation inside Pakistan. The FIA actually, I think, went ahead for several years with its investigation, found at least where the terror training camps were. They found where the boat was bought, for example, and all the rest of that. In 2016, January, Pakistan again offered to, file an FIR, start an investigation into the Pathankot air base attack. Is there anything you think Pakistan could have done in the last week that would have changed the scenario as far as India is concerned?
No, some similar offer may have offered a way out, but there has been no such offer. There is complete denial. And on the other hand, very belligerent statements are coming. Now, I don't know who, obviously, Asim Munir is in charge. And he has been a hardliner going by his speeches and public pronouncements, etc. The circumstances under which, those offers were made earlier. I remember after Pathankot, it was Nawaz Sharif who was the prime minister. He's someone who has spoken of good relations with India all along. He tried to do whatever he could, but obviously he was helpless in front of the army chief. 2008, it was the result of the international pressure that we built up. We didn't take any publicized punitive action, but a lot of international pressure was built up on Pakistan in the wake of the attack, and because nationals of some other countries also got killed in that attack. And that led them to make those offers and, do a certain number of things, which then led to de-escalation. But we can probably talk of that a little later.
Sure. General Hooda, how would you, as a military person, rate the 5-point diplomatic measures that have been taken by the government so far? What is interesting is that the government has cancelled visas, done away with certain diplomatic posts, the defense attaches. It has also spoken of suspending the Indus Water Treaty, which was an international treaty signed in 1960, but it hasn't so far spoken about calling off the ceasefire at the LOC that was negotiated in 2021 and is a continuation, in a sense, of the 2003 ceasefire. So how would you rate the diplomatic measures taken so far?
So Suhasini, among the diplomatic measures, so frankly, trade at the borders, the number of visas that were being issued was very limited as it is. So, but I think what is significant in the long term is the fact that while you have said that you're holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, and also linking it with terrorist activities in Pakistan. So if you look at the statement, they've directly linked that this surveillance is till the time that Pakistan continues to do its terrorist activities. And I think more than the physical impact, because immediately, obviously, you cannot stop the flow of water in these rivers, but it's had a psychological impact among not only the political leaders from the statements that they've given out. I mean, they've talked about going to war over this water. Also, among the common people, I think there would be concerns and fears, say, among the common farmer. So I would rate that as something significant in a long-term perspective. On the ceasefire, we can discuss a little later when we come to those areas.
Okay. Ambassador Sabharwal, how would you look at the 5-point diplomatic measures? Some of them are measures that have been taken in the past, some like the Indus Waters Treaty and perhaps Pakistan's response on the Shimla Agreement are new.
Yeah, let me go over briefly. Let me first say that of all the measures, the one that is significant and that has agitated Pakistanis the most, understandably, is the move on the Indus Waters Treaty. The remaining measures, I regard them as largely symbolic. Let me talk of the Atari Integrated Check Post. Inaugurated in 2012, upgraded. It never, was used to its full potential because trade never opened up. An expectation that was there at that time. Then 2019, Pakistan suspended trade with India altogether. So it was grossly underutilized. Only Afghan exports are coming through it, which Pakistan has now stopped. SARC visa scheme for specific categories, dignitaries, etc., was a very limited category. So we've withdrawn it. Then visa services for Pak nationals have been suspended. The number of visas had gone down significantly over the years. And when I was there, at one time we were issuing 60,000 visas a year, 100,000 before that at some stage. And now how many? I was seeing a press report that 800 or so Pakistani nationals have left. So it's not as if hordes of Pakistanis were here, who lost out because of this and had to go back. And then, of course, reduction in the size of missions. They had been halved in 2020, now reduced to 30. The Indus Treaty is very precious for Pakistan as a water-stressed country, as a lower riparian. And they have had, and I saw it as High Commissioner, apprehensions all along, serious apprehensions. Their strategic planners and the public that at some stage India may decide to divert the waters of Pakistan's share of water for its own use. Now, they see it happening in practice. India has not only said that it is putting the treaty in abeyance, holding it in abeyance, but has said that it will actively work to divert Pakistan's share of water for its own use. So this causes complete uncertainty for them regarding water availability in future. So this hurts. This is an important psychological, pressure on them. What can be done immediately? We can, and I'm sure we'll stop giving hydrological data, which is used for managing flows and floods, etc. We can build our own projects without adhering to the stipulations of the treaty informing Pakistan. But because of lack of infrastructure, which is building it is very time consuming, storage and diversionary canals, etc. Technically challenging because of the heights at which those rivers flow, costly, time consuming. Its bite in terms of diverting Pakistan's share of water in the immediate will not be consequential. But significant psychological pressure,
And it is something new. In that vein, if I could ask you, Ambassador Sabharwal, when you look at the responses of the past, 2008 Mumbai, the kind of diplomatic pressure, 2016 the cross LOC strikes, as well as some of the diplomatic pressure. I remember, getting the US and the UK involved in this and calling it a fight against terrorism specifically. 2019 bombing a part of Pakistan that is not disputed, and saying we're targeting terror groups directly, and then also the diplomatic measures that were taken. Are there lessons learned, or are there actually things that should be avoided when we think about 2025 and the response that is to come?
Well, let me tell you about 2008 very briefly, the template that worked for de-escalation. Initially, they completely denied. They were not even willing to acknowledge that Ajmal Kasab, the lone gunman caught by us, was their national. But slowly, I think international pressure built, as I said earlier, because nationals of other countries had also been killed. India was able to mobilize that pressure. No, there was no publicized punitive activity, but that pressure resulted in Pakistan acknowledging not only that Kasab was with their national, but also ordering an investigation by their federal investigation agency. It's at this stage that I went as High Commissioner in early April 2009. June of 2009, they gave us a dossier. 30-page dossier, Rahman Malik, the then Interior Minister, in which they acknowledged for the first and the last time that the attack was mounted from their territory, conspiracy hatched, and attack launched by Lashkar-e-Toiba. And they gave us elaborate details of, training and, where the boat was launched near the Karachi coast, the first ride, which took them and brought them to Mumbai, etc., etc. And they told us they had 7 persons in their custody. Zakir Rahman Lakhvi, who is the operations commander. They issued a charge sheet. Subsequently, they launched prosecution in an anti-terrorism court later that year. That offered us, a way towards de-escalation. There were hiccups. You remember the famous or infamous, looking depending upon how you look at it, Sharm el-Sheikh statement, which incidentally was issued after we got that dossier, detailed dossier. So that was a little opening we offered, but that ran into problems at home. But overall, that process continued. We resumed dialogue in March 2011, and General Hooda would bear me out that 2012 had the lowest level of violence on the line of control and in Jammu and Kashmir since the turn of the century. But of course, what I am not sure about is whether that offers any possibilities for today. First of all, it's not clear whether Pakistan would be willing to do even what it did then. And admitted that was a big thing. Pakistan had never done it earlier and has never done it since then. And secondly, whether that kind of action would be acceptable to our government. So that's on 2008.
Right. General Hooda, from your perspective, of course, you were most closely associated with the 2016 counter-strike strike after. But in your perception, are there lessons to be learned before we take the next step? Are there lessons to avoid, actually, in the next response?
Look, I think the lessons are that, and particularly, so not so much after 2016, Pakistanis said nothing has happened. So we had planned for, what kind of reaction could come from the other side. But once that statement was made, we said, look, possibly we are not going to see any overt action from Pakistan. 2019, I think, sort of taught us that there will be a retaliation. There will be a response from Pakistan. In fact, if you look at Pakistan writings, they talk about post 2019 a strategy of quid pro quo plus. So they say we will react in an equal manner plus a little more if India does something. So I think as we contemplate actions now, we need to one clearly prepare for that. If we are going to do something militarily, there is going to be a response. And so how is that retaliation to be looked at? If there is escalation, can we manage that escalation at different levels? I thought after 2019 we hadn't looked at this aspect enough, so there was a bit of a sort of a hasty reaction to when Pakistan, carried out a retaliation. These are things that we'll need to look at. What's the lowest level of military force which can be considered a success from our side? So some of these things are, I think, Suhasini need to be gone into. Now people suddenly start talking about let's take POK and all. I think it's that those are things that are a bit far-fetched.
What you're saying is we not only have to now prepare for the strike after the terror attack, but for the possible counter-strike as well, and be well prepared in gaming all of that. Very quickly, General Hooda, could I just ask you, you said maybe taking POK or taking posts in POK is a stretch at the next level. Do you think a surgical strike on an identified, designated individual like Hafiz Saeed, the head of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, is a possibility?
Yeah, it's a possibility. If we have that kind of intelligence, if we have that kind of capacity, capability, like the US has in taking out top leadership, it's possible. I'm not sure we have that kind of capability, capacity to be able to do that. But surely, I mean, that's fair game, if I can put it that way. That's a legitimate target for us.
Yeah, Ambassador Sabharwal, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, very briefly, I think about 2016 and 19, we also need to draw some lessons on what impact these actions had. Obviously, they have an impact. They introduce uncertainty in the minds of Pakistan's terror planners. They lull the terror activity to some extent, etc., etc. But it's very clear in the light of what happened later on or what happened now that those kind of actions do not have the capacity to secure an enduring change in Pakistan's behavior. I think that's another lesson probably which we should
So,
keep it.
in other words, a deterrent is not so far something we've been able to find. What we're essentially doing is ensuring that there is a pushback.
No, I would qualify that. A deterrent, temporary, to lull the activity, etc., but deterrent which would result in an enduring change in that behavior, that we haven't been able to find.
And that's still being looked for. Could I ask you about any kind of diplomatic engagement? We've seen, as you said, since 2019, things have really degraded. We've seen perhaps no diplomatic bilateral engagements. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar did finally go to Islamabad last year, but that was for an SCO conference, and he made it clear that he was not discussing bilateral issues there. Even so, that was something. There was the 2021 ceasefire as well. Do you think that these measures are now redundant? Should some of them continue? Should the ceasefire continue? Should India's membership of the SCO, where Pakistan is also a member, and it's the requirement of engaging with Pakistan at multilateral forums, should those continue?
Well, ceasefire, I'll give you my take as a former diplomat, as a citizen. I think now the primary challenge that we have is China. Our responsibilities on that side have grown. And I have said more than once in my articles that it's in our interest to keep the Western border as calm as possible. But that, of course, is to the future. At the moment, it's very, very volatile because of what has happened. SCO, of course, is a much larger organization. We cannot leave it just because Pakistan is there, or China has an active role there. But there's Russia, there are other countries, and so on. So there are larger considerations there for us to be around in that organization.
All right. General Hooda, your thoughts on the ceasefire in particular and other engagements?
Look, Suhasini, when we went in for the ceasefire in 2021, it made strategic sense. As Ambassador Sabharwal had said, we were looking more closely at the military challenge from China, the fact that a large number of forces had got deployed there, and we were in a very sort of uncertain situation as far as the line of actual control is concerned. The point, Swasni, is can we completely insulate the ceasefire from the state of India-Pakistan relations as they exist today? And I think we can't do that. So on one side, we say, look, we are contemplating military force. On the other side, we say the ceasefire will stand. We are already seeing breaches that are happening on the ceasefire, and I think it will only sort of increase because obviously both sides would have built up additional forces along the line of control, expecting something. There'll be huge suspicion on any movements that are taking place on both sides, and which is why these incidents have started occurring. If and when a military action takes place, I think the ceasefire will not survive.
All right. Is there a point of any kind of engagement in the future? Has Pahalgam, in a sense, drawn a red line, General Hooda?
So, Swasti, for now, it really has drawn a red line. Now, we can't look, 5-10 years down the line and see what happens. But if you're looking at the immediate future and seeing how things go from here, seeing the coming weeks and what further actions are taken, on the Indian and Pakistani side. For now, I think I don't see any sort of positive engagement happening. As Ambassador Sabharwal said, are we seeing any kind of positive signals coming from the Pakistani side? And really, no. It's a lot of rhetoric also on the other side, talking about war, Sherry Rahman talking about nuclear weapons,
Yes.
So do we see anything positive that is coming from the other side? And we don't.
All right. Ambassador Sabharwal, with all your experience, do you think bilateral dialogue is just a thing of the past, that Pahalgam has essentially put a red line on it?
No, I hope, and I'm sure there'll be life after this crisis. I don't know what its denouement will be, how it will be resolved. There'll be life after this crisis, but my own reading today is that the horizon and the trajectory of this relationship, even beyond the resolution of this crisis, remains very somber. Because diplomacy has taken a complete backseat for various reasons. First, our terror and talks cannot go together policy. And then, of course, Pakistan made an unreasonable demand, which it sticks to, that India must withdraw its 370, Article 370 move for any bilateral engagement. So no diplomacy is there. The two countries are dependent entirely on security, veterans, and coercion to manage the relationship. Now, ideally, I have said in one of my articles recently, coercion should be a means to an end, with its impact being leveraged at some stage through dialogue and diplomacy to bring the adversary to a more desirable stage. Now, what that stage could be, I don't think it's permanent peace between India and Pakistan. Given the nature of the Pakistani state and no changes on the cards, that shouldn't be even our aim. Our aim, to my mind, should be to manage this relationship at the lowest possible level of volatility. So that's why I have been saying when that time comes, it's not for today. While deterrence and coercion should remain part of our repertoire, it goes without saying for a country like Pakistan. You can't do without them. But they should be complemented by diplomacy whenever required to move things in a positive direction. Because if it's a journey of coercion, and coercion becomes an end in itself, that creates an environment which is prone to violence and volatility. And of course, there are stray incidents. Our security forces valiantly, protect us against most of that volatility. But not chance the enemy gets through.
And the chances of miscalculation, the chances of misadventures goes up in that scenario. General Hooda, if I could talk a little bit about the manner of the Pahalgam attack, because both of you have now alluded, even in this conversation, to the nature of the Pakistani army, and in particular, what we have heard coming from General Asim Munir. This particular attack came just 5 days after what seemed like a threat to India was made to the Parliament and Senate, where General Munir actually spoke about the Jafar Express attack. He spoke about Kashmir being a jugular vein of Pakistan. He spoke about religious differences and the importance of the two-nation theory. It seems as if there is a difference even in the preamble to the Pahalgam attacks. Do you think, firstly, that there is a difference in the manner of the attack? Some have suggested that actually the terrorists in this particular attack, unlike some of the past, were trained para-commandos from Pakistan. Some have suggested that this is a revenge attack for Jafar Express, and it hasn't escaped anyone's notice that exactly 26 people died in terms of the civilian casualties in both those attacks. Do you think there is a difference? And do you think in particular we need to look at the way the Pakistan Army chief has been speaking?
Absolutely, Suhasini, you already pointed it out. The speech that he gave in which he talked about Kashmir being the jugular vein, and how Hindus and Muslims are sort of completely different. This attack, the character is different. So we've had large incidents, 2016 Uri, for example, and 2019 Pulwama. This is much more deliberate in the sense, 4 terrorists sneak into Uri garrison. Whether 5 soldiers will get killed or 19 soldiers would get killed, nobody knows. It's happened, the way it did. But singling out tourists, singling out unarmed civilians, clearly trying to identify religious identities and then pulling them out. Shooting males only in front of their wives and children. This is, I think, a very deliberate provocation. But Swasni, if you ask me, despite our saying that things were getting better, and certainly they were getting better in Jammu and Kashmir, we were actually seeing an attempt to create additional violence in Jammu and Kashmir. So look at the last 1.5 years, you find the Director General Police saying 100 terrorists have infiltrated. They are much better trained. Areas like Riyasi, Katwa, which had not seen militancy for 15 years. Those were getting activated. Uh, Even at that time, there was a talk that some of these are, ex-military guys. So I think some pattern was evident. But of course, this is a very, very deliberate provocation. It's not possible that some local terrorist group has thought this up, Suhasini. The implications are just too much for this.
Ambassador Sabharwal, given your experience of dealing with Pakistani army chiefs, and we know that in Pakistan they have a position that is unassailable in a certain sense, do you see a difference with this one?
Yes, I have seen a difference right from the beginning. Look, when I was there, Kayani was the chief of army staff. His reputation was that of a thinking kind of person. He had been DG ISI as army chief also. He was a little more cautious in what he did. He wasn't a commando like Musharraf. Musharraf himself was very adventurous in the beginning. He was appointed towards the end of my tenure as Deputy High Commissioner in 1998. His first few years, he was very adventurous. And then, of course, pulls and pressures that resulted from 9/11, he changed his policy and started a new approach towards India also. Then we have been hearing of Bajwa, economic diplomacy, etc.
Economics, yeah.
Economic security instead of only physical security, etc., etc. There is no such idea that has come from this person. Very enigmatic about what he thinks about India, but going by his public statements, some of which repeat what has been said by the Pakistanis earlier. But the way he speaks, it seems he's a hardliner, and you see what has happened and the kind of approach that is being taken in this crisis.
Sure. Certainly, another factor that may take on a new role is China. This is the first such attack we are seeing and the response being contemplated since the LAC standoff with China. And of course, as General Hooda had said earlier, it allowed for, and you've said as well, it allowed for India to deal with the LAC challenge. I have a two-pronged question. Given that China has now made a very strong statement in support of Pakistan's sovereignty as well as its legitimate security interests, but given the fact that we are now in talks with China, a rapprochement process was underway, do you think China's possible response to a military operation should be factored in, a military operation by India, I mean? And can China offer an off-ramp? Can China offer to guarantee a process in some way and help with de-escalation? Ambassador Sabharwal, if I could ask you.
That last one, I don't know. I mean, from their public statements made so far, as you said, they have supported, Pakistan's right to defend its sovereignty and legitimate security interests. They have favored this so-called impartial probe, which Pakistan has suggested, which is a diversionary tactic. But Suhasini, we must understand that China is now more deeply invested in Pakistan than ever before because of the CPEC, which is its route to the sea, bypassing the maritime choke points in the east, notably Malacca Strait. Now, 80% of Pakistan's weaponry comes from China. There are linkages across the board, very close linkages between the armed forces, economically, you name the area, and there are linkages between the two countries. I must add, for the listeners of this podcast, that my knowledgeable interlocutors, Pakistani interlocutors, would always tell me that China has always counseled us not to get into any big trouble with India. Because that might bring them into it. And my assessment is they may give some same kind of advice to Pakistan this time also. As to what extent they can get involved, this is a military question, which I'm sure you would pose to General Hooda also. But my own assessment is that would depend upon what kind of action we take, what is Pakistan's response and what it develops into. If it's something thing like Balakot strike, another response, and then it sort of de-escalates, then it would make no sense for them to do anything.
Right. Um, uh, General Hooda, if I could ask you the same about China. Does China need to be factored in when it comes? We have had army chiefs on our side speaking about the two-front war now being a reality. Do you think this may be an occasion where that gets tested?
Look, Suhasini, if something is contemplated against China, it isn't as if, contemplated against Pakistan that, we are not going to pay any attention at all to the line of actual control. That's not going to happen. I just want to echo what Ambassador Sabharwal is saying. It all depends on what kind of action we take. As long as Chinese interests in the CPEC, etc., are not threatened, there is a more sort of limited option that we exercise. I don't see, China sort of aggressively trying to do something. Maybe they'll help out with the intelligence, etc. And the fact that, after 4.5 years, we've just coming to some normalization of the LAC, would they sort of put that normalization in danger? They're talking, these days about India, China coming together against Trump's tariffs, etc. So I don't think they'll jeopardize all that, unless, of course, there is massive escalation that takes place.
So on that note, I would like to end by saying, yes, there is a caveat that developments are fast-paced. We're seeing so many meetings at the highest levels going on. I want to end by asking both of you what you think is the next step that is warranted. What do you think India should do? Should there be a military response now? And what kind of military response they should actually attempt, given that the element of surprise, if you like, is now gone? Ambassador Sabharwal, thoughts?
Yeah, very briefly, again, not a military expert, but given some red lines that we drew with the surgical strikes and the Balakot strike, I believe, we should reinforce, that some way. What way we would do that, I don't know. It is up to the government, and I don't know what they would do. The only other view that I have held in these cases is that while both the government and armed forces should be free to choose the place and time of action, as Prime Minister has said, more time and place of action, it's preferable to do it without publicity, if possible at all, because then you reduce chances of escalation. When you do it with a lot of publicity, etc., so on, the other side is, forced or the other. But I do understand the imperatives of the public sentiment. So let's see how things pan out.
To send the message out, but not in terms of making it publicly unviable for the other side not to respond in the same way. General Hooda, your thoughts?
I think the use of military force, and I think in a limited way, is something that the government would be seriously considering. How it works out, what form it takes, again, as I said, we should not speculate. It's up to the government to do. The government should not do it with too much publicity, but what we have seen in the past, I mean, to me suggests just otherwise, that there is going to be some hype surrounding it, which obviously will also put pressure on Pakistan to retaliate. And as I said, we have to be prepared for that and prepared for a certain level of escalation.
All right. You're not suggesting a specific type of military operation?
No, Suhasini, that I think, people on the ground, the chiefs, they know the situation much better than I do. So what form and type it takes, I think let's leave it to them.
And of course, by the time this podcast airs, events may have overtaken us. But I'd like to thank you so much, General Hooda, Ambassador Sabharwal, for joining us to discuss through what really are the options and what are the best case scenarios, for India to move forward after the Pahalgam attack. And thank you so much for speaking to us, and to all our listeners, thank you for listening in. This has been the Hindu's Parley podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suhasini. Thank you very much.
Thank you.